I wish I was at the Gower. I saw that the surf was good down on that coastline today.
It would be lovely down there. Good afternoon, all, and welcome to the third and latest series of the Aspect Creative Toolkits program. And I want to say a big thank you to Aspect because they sponsor these sessions and get us involved in supporting you to move your project, your research further to reach more people. And this is series 3, so we've been playing with the topics again. If in case you've missed it, we've had brand already and video. You'll be able to find those videos on the Aspect platform. Hopefully this week, Frank is looking into getting that sorted for you, so you'll be able to find those. And we're also writing them up with kind of some key points. So I've got the transcript. So if you can't make the whole video, or if you want to know why you should be watching it, we're going to have some articles to go with those as well. This week it's all about AI, but two very different perspectives. I mean, it's a topic that comes up a lot. It's, I think it's overwhelming, it's exciting, it's challenging, it's got some ethical issues. But the key thing we all want to be is empowered to use it and know what we should be using it for, how to be using it wisely, and what tools are out there. Which I think leads very nicely into you, doesn't it, Blue? Getting you involved.
Yeah. This is where hopefully I can come in and add some value with people's journey using some of these tools, no matter where you are, if it's completely new or you're using these daily or weekly. I'm sure there'll be something in today's session that you're not aware of or that you want to evolve the way that you use these tools.
I learn
And
every time you do this because there's always something. Well, basically, it's always evolving, isn't it? These tools
exactly.
and you're using them all the time. So for me, I think it's you're kind of the hive mind for me of what's going on. So make sure that we use them all correctly. And the way that this works as a format is please do put your questions in chat. You can also ask a Q&A. My job here is host. I will be politely interrupting Blue and going, oh, we've got a really good question. We'll try and answer them on the fly, which I think is one of the best things about being able to do these online.
Yeah.
But you will have links and follow-up bits after this as well. So I say these are quite intense. Don't attempt to take it all in, but I will say have your web browser ready to be open. There will be some activity on this.
Yeah, brilliant. So should we rock and roll, Lucy?
Yeah, go for it.
Amazing. So I will share my screen and we will get things going. As Lucy said, today will be interactive. So if you want to work alongside me while I do some of these exercises, you're more than welcome. If it's too fast, don't stress. We'll share resources and videos so that you can go through this in your own time. It's totally up to the way that you prefer to learn. But if you're keen, please do try these as we go through examples. So hopefully you're in the right workshop. We're going to talk about leveraging or enhancing academic research with different tools. The tools that we are going to explore are generative AI. Generative AI is often what we're talking about, especially in the media when people talk about AI, often those like ChatGPT are forms of generative AI. But we'll get into a little bit more around language and words later. So just to ground us, outcomes and housekeeping for the next sort of 90 minutes or so, we're going to run through some of the AI fundamentals. So what is AI? Some of its applications, its potential. We are going to touch on a few of its downsides and the ethics, especially around environment, but we're not going to do a deep dive into that subject matter. It's complex and we don't have the time to go into all the different nuances, but I would encourage you to look at other workshops and read and listen to the debate around some of these other concerns. So we're more focused on practical knowledge today. So looking at different types of tools that you can use alongside your research to augment your research, to create things like presentations, to write grant applications, or to look at driving impact from your research, whether or not that's into some sort of venture, policy change, or any of those other assets that we quantify impact as. We're going to look at effective prompts. So you might have heard this fancy word called prompt engineering. Technologists like to use fancy words. We're going to keep it really simple. Prompt engineering just means the way that you ask these tools questions. And I'm going to give you a really simple framework to optimize the way that you use these tools so that you get better information as an output. And in terms of housekeeping, as Lucy said, please pitch in with any questions in the chat. And If I don't see them, Lucy will jump in. That's fine. This is interactive. And we do have a car park for out of scope topics. And although we will touch on ethics and environment, they are slightly out of scope for today's session. So let's get going. And I guess it would be really useful if you knew who I was as well. So my name's Blue O'Connor. I'm the social venture manager at the London School of Economics. I'm also a director at a charity called Talk Club that I co-founded, and I'm also an impact consultant at Social Venturize. I am not a technical expert in AI. I'm definitely an experimenter and someone that's been learning this and experimenting heavily over the last 2 years. I do have a background in aerospace engineering, but in terms of these tools, I'm very much like you. I've learned more about them and I've adjusted my ways of working. And I'm now learned enough that I'm able to consult and advise other organizations, small and medium enterprises, charities, social enterprises, and universities on some of the ways to utilize these tools. Cool. So the first thing we're going to do, like I said, this is practical, so we're going to go straight into it. We're going to go to a tool called SciSpace. So the URL for this is typeset.io. So if you pop that into your web browser, you should end up coming to a website that looks a bit like this. And the first message that you should see is it's the fastest research platform ever. I'm not quite sure if that's true or not, but it's definitely quick and useful. And the difference around this tool is that you can ask it questions, a bit like ChatGPT or any of the other large language models that you might use. But this tool is underpinned by academic research. So its data set is a lot more robust. It comes from a collaboration of different universities and open source resource. And so when you're asking this question, you're getting an answer that's at a much higher level of integrity than what I would sometimes refer to as the wild, wild west of ChatGPT. So if you weren't aware, ChatGPT is trained on the internet, and we know how unreliable that data set can be at times. Now, difference with SciSpace is that this tool is trained on academic research. Again, not perfect, but we're improving the data set that we're working with. So for a quick example, I'm just going to ask SciSpace a question. What are the long-term cognitive benefits of early childhood reading on academic performance? And just click the red arrow, and that's going to go away and perform a very fast search against that data set of research and answer my question. What I personally like about SciSpace is that it gives me quite a detailed answer, but it starts to reference the research papers that it's using in its answer. I won't go into the details verbatim here, but as you scroll down, you'll start to see the papers that it's basing its answers upon. So if I wanted to go and look at that specific paper, depending on my own access, and if it's open source, I might be able to go and look at that document. I can create a podcast of that research, or I can have a conversation with that research document, which is very cool. I can also ask it to answer the question only using top papers, so those from top journals and conferences. So if I select that little tab, it will complete the question, or sorry, it will answer my question again, but only using research from top journals. And again, within, I don't know, less than 30 seconds, we have an answer against those top journals. I won't read those verbatim. As I scroll down, I'm then able to, for example, click on the first research that it references. I can have a conversation with that research. Okay, let me, please, can you summarize the research paper, this research paper? And maybe I would ask this question before I wanted to take the time out to read the full paper. If I want to read the full paper, in this particular example, I can click on the PDF and I will be sent straight to that one. That's not always the case. It depends on the level of access that this research has been given or you have within your academic institution, but you can get to most of them. As I scroll down, there's different types of functionality and the way that I can interact with this document. So it's a really, really cool tool. There's other functions within this SciSpace web browser, but its main value is the search function that I've just shown you.
And it looks like you can do quite a lot free, because I've been having a play while you've been talking. So one of the questions from Kristen was about kind of some of the what you get and what you have to pay for.
Yeah, it's a good question. Like most of these tools, they'll give you so much for free, and then they'll either ask you to supply them with your email. And when you do that, you're exchanging data as a um, as a value exchange for them to give you more access. With SciSpace, I haven't yet had to pay for the subscription because I haven't used it enough, and I use it quite a lot, to be honest. So just by setting up an account and giving them my email, you do get quite a lot for free. Obviously, there's a data exchange there, so nothing is for free. But in terms of costing, it's free up to a certain point.
And I've heard a comment about it. It's a bit like Illicit. Have you heard of Illicit? Is that, yeah?
Yeah, Elicit's in that long list of tabs. Very similar to Elicit.
And
So
then
that's
really,
another one.
an issue question about what you can do with these tools to enhance our papers' search descriptions. I guess what you're thinking about, Kirsten, is getting found as authors. I know it's hard because this is like a Google, isn't it? So it's almost like search engine optimization of your research.
It's a great question. That is a topic that's coming up, and I've seen a company starting to offer this service in the marketplace for products. So SEO for ChatGPT, for products that are trying to become the answer that ChatGPT gives people. I don't know how that works and the complexities behind that, but I can see that translating into research. That would be something I'd be fascinated to go and explore, but I don't actually know the answer to that one.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
But SEO for research, it's a great question. Cool. So that's SciSpace. Has anyone popped the question in? What do they think of the results? Is anyone already using this? Do they think it would be useful? Do they think it won't be useful?
So how
Feel
might you
free to.
use it? So I was thinking I might put a bit of a description of my project in there to see who else is looking at a similar sort of thing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely use it that way. You could also use it to look for gaps if you were looking to start a new piece of research to
yeah.
ensure that you're part of your research review at the start.
I guess you could look collaboratively, kind of someone who's looking at, because I mean, universities are big villages. There could be literally somebody doing something very similar in a different department, or looking regionally, so look at who can collaborate in your region or across your groups. I can see it as a really good way to look into the conversations that are already happening.
Yeah, I agree with that, Lucy.
I'm all about collaboration, so that's the first thing that always springs to mind is like, how can I make my life easier and work with some other people to get more done, to achieve more reach and more impact.
Yeah, I agree. I've used it on the student side quite often, especially around looking for maybe more esoteric research papers that maybe aren't available through my academic institution's library. That can be quite interesting if I'm trying to bring something in that's quite different to the specific reading list that I've been assigned.
Is it
That,
international as well? So, yeah.
yeah, yeah, I'm
Oh.
trying to think. I think it originated in the States, but don't hold me to that one. If you go into SciSpace and find out its origins, I do think it was a stateside university collaboration to
Mm.
start with. Cool. So we will move on from SciSpace and feel free to drop comments and questions.
You could also get some. Look, I'm having it's a rabbit hole. I'm off down it because you could also get some data, couldn't you? Something we'll talk about next week is you could actually find some data to help you outline, the story behind your project, why it's so important, the amount of people impacted. There could be somebody who's already researched that. So it could save you so much time, but also then have something directly referenceable, which is another piece of credible research. So yeah, really strong.
Yeah, I agree. My assumption is as well that it could be useful for meta analysis because you could
Mm.
ask it a question and within 30 seconds you've got 10 to 20 academic papers that are related to that question that you might then export and use into a use as a meta analysis. I'm not just looking at the chat. Connor Evans has said that he did a search and his own publication came up as the top result.
Yay! There are 285 million research papers in there, according to the SciSpace website, which is
Wow.
mind-blowing. I mean, that's more than a needle in a haystack, isn't it? If you're going off to try and find that manually.
Yeah, that's fascinating that that's came up as top. Maybe we should speak to Connor about how to do the SEO of research papers after
Bit of
that.
business opportunity coming here.
Cool. Okay, so we will move on from SciSpace, and it was mentioned. Lucy mentioned someone in the chat said that Elicit is very similar. So if you did want to experiment, and I always recommend this, there's not one tool that best suits anyone or any particular need. I would experiment and see which one ends up adding the most value depending on the context, the situation, and your need. Elicit and Perplexity are also quite good.
There's writing
So
templates in SciSpace as well, helping you with your thesis statements. And, again, what a great wealth of information there, because obviously it's evolved as people have been using it,
exactly.
which is the same with all these tools.
Yeah, I'll be fascinated to see what it's structured. Is it a for profit? Is it not for profit? And yeah, what the business model is behind SciSpace as well.
Mm.
Cool. Okay, so we've done a quick exercise and saw an immediate use case for SciSpace and how it could help us practically. We're now just going to go back to some of the basics before we go into some more complex use cases. And we're going to start with some fundamentals. So I'm sure most people know that AI stands for artificial intelligence. And what that means is AI helps computers think and learn like humans, rapidly processing huge amounts of data. We've just seen that with SciSpace, 2.5 million research papers, and it's able to search and find an answer to our question within 30 seconds, which is unbelievable. So some other the key concepts that might come up in today's discussion, or that you might have heard in the public domain or in your institution. Machine learning basically just means the way that a system learns from data. We learn from data and inputs as humans. We're now able to train machines to learn from data sets. LLM stands for large language model. SciSpace, ChatGPT, some of these other big large language models that you may have heard of. We have Claude, we have Google's, it's not Bard anymore, is it? It's trying to think what Google's LLM is. So they're just types of AI trained to understand and generate human language outputs. So we can interact with them like a human and they give us outputs in human language. We touched on this at the start, but just to reiterate, generative AI can create new things. It's generative, it generates often things like text, images, music, video, code, websites, apps, web browser apps. The list is growing and these things are advancing rapidly, as Lucy said at the start of this session. And some of the popular AI tools that you may have heard of, like I said, ChatGPT, Microsoft Copilot, Google Gemini, SciSpace, Perplexity, Gamma, which we'll touch on today, Claude, Runway, and there's literally thousands of these on the market and thousands coming into the market on a week by week basis. I think we're very much in the hype cycle of AI, and over the next couple of years, we should see the market stabilize and a lot of these tools fade away, especially the ones that don't add value or don't have robust business models underneath. But at the moment, we're very much in the hype cycle. And just to reiterate, we don't need to understand all the nomenclature or how it even works to leverage the value of some of these tools. You may want to if you've got a curious mind or you want to understand the technical elements of these, but you don't have to. The example I often give is a smartphone. I don't really have any idea how my smartphone works, yet I utilize the value that it generates for me on a daily basis. This is the same for these tools. But if you are curious, I would encourage you to go and understand and dig deeper into these topics because it is fascinating. Cool. So you've probably heard some of these benefits touted around, but we're just going to do a quick recap. So some of the value that these tools can bring to us as individuals and teams and ventures and organization is improved efficiency. So whether or not that's via automation, semi-automation, or generation, it can help in decision making. These tools are much better than us at analyzing large data sets, and they can generate insights almost instantaneously. They can increase creativity. We can generate new ideas faster. We can bring in other perspectives that we might not have in the room by allocating these tools certain personas. They can help us with cost reduction. They can enable especially startups and smaller teams to deliver on scale with quite lean teams. And they can often be a resource bridge. Again, especially in startups and small ventures, we can get assistance or guidance in areas that we might not have in our immediate disposal or in our team. The caveat there is that make sure that you're always using a trusted tool and that that data set is as robust as it can be. For example, I wouldn't go into ChatGPT and ask it for legal advice on certain matters because, as I said, ChatGPT is trained on the whole wild west of the internet. And if I was to make a decision, especially around legal and ramifications that that might have, I'd be better off going to pay for an AI tool that's being built by a legal firm. And there's a couple of those on the market. A case study how some institutions are already using these tools. So this was one I read about a couple of months ago. A linguistics department at a European university was creating instructional videos in multiple languages to support global learners. So there's tools on the market now that can provide instantaneous language translation. There's actually some that can do that in real time now. I haven't tried them, but for example, if I was delivering this workshop globally now, if you were based in Spain and you wanted this in Spanish, as I'm speaking, there would be an instantaneous translation for receipt on your end, which absolutely blows my mind. I haven't seen that one, but I know that it's on the market.
I think a key narrative for me with all of those users is that AI is not the finished product. It is a great conversation starter. I use it so much to just take away from the blank sheet of paper or go and explore. So even like with the legal one, you might be asking it where to look. What do I need to investigate? It's really good at thinking around a topic. It's not perfect. It's far from perfect, but it's a good way to kind of move you forward. I've used it for, say, brainstorming idea creation, and yeah, some of it's rubbish, but at least it's taken away from the I don't know where to start. Like with the research, looking at SciSpace, it just gives you some hooks. It moves you forward. It won't do your job for you. So we'll take
Yeah.
that fear narrative of, we're all going to be out of work and on the beach or in the Gower. I think we've gone to the Gower, haven't we, today? So that's fine, on the surf. It's not going to do that, but it hopefully will give us more time to do the richer things.
Yeah, and that's the perspective that I come at this with, Lucy, is that this is about augmentation, not replacement.
Yeah.
So we still need that human level of interaction and that ability to be able to think critically, because sometimes what comes back at us from these tools isn't good enough and actually can sometimes be wrong. I'm sure you've
Yep.
heard of the terms like hallucination, where especially ChatGPT might get something completely wrong. It might make up a fake resource or research paper that actually doesn't exist. We still need to have that ability to think critically, to examine what's coming back at us. These are essential skills in life anyway, but I think what these tools are going to make the need for some of these other skills even more critical. Brill. Moving on. So, a couple of bit of the AI fundamentals and basics. We're going to dig a bit deeper into the opportunities and challenges in higher education. I'm not going to spend too much time in here, but I think it would be a disservice not to touch on some of these. We've touched on a lot of the opportunities. Outside of the ones that I've said, we can look at hopefully these tools can supplement and reduce overworking and burnout because, as Lucy said, maybe some of the more admin heavy or low value tasks that sometimes we always often get overburdened with, we can either semi-automate or automate them out. But let's touch a bit more on the challenges. So there is this potential, we're already actually seeing it, to exacerbate inequality, especially around topics like the digital divide. If you don't have the foundational skills to even interact with some of these tools, you're unable to extract the value. But there's other inequalities that these tools can exacerbate, especially when we think about the data sets that they're trained on. They could perpetuate a lack of diversity. This would be through data bias. If we think about the data that is on the internet, it's mostly written in English, it's mostly written by European or North American organizations, individuals. So inherently there is already some sort of bias in that data set. We need to be aware of that. We won't be able to solve that as individuals, but we need to be aware of that and try to mitigate that through the way that we prompt these tools or the different types of tools that we use. Energy and water consumption, that's something that I'm personally concerned about when using these tools. I think what we often find in a lot of these debates are the most extreme sides. I'm yet to find any compelling or reputable research that actually can say the amount of energy and water consumption, especially when you're thinking about a counterfactual. I've seen what the energy and water consumption might be for one prompt, but if I was going to answer my question using Google 10 times or a different type of tool, what's the counterfactual? I'm yet to see that level of inquiry. If anyone has, please share it though. And there's other ethical and data considerations, IP, and there's a lot of pushback in the creative industry around the way that OpenAI is training its data, what it uses to train its data, and plagiarism is a big topic. We have governments trying to catch up, and there's new policy and amended policy coming into play. I'm not an expert in that arena. If you're at a higher education institution, they should have some sort of policy around the way that you use these tools. I would always check in with that particular department or expert before you use any of these. Cool. And then just a quick fire round of example cases in higher education that I've seen. We've just touched on one: literature reviews, hypothesis generation, transcribing interviews or coding thematic data, automation of research grants, presentation creation, and these tools all become more valuable and unique when you use your own data. And I think that's where universities are in quite a strong position, in the fact that anyone can go and interact with ChatGPT and use the data from the internet. Universities have this data set that's grounded in research and some of it world leading and novel. How can they use that alongside some of these advanced tools to create impact? I think that's what excites me the most about what's happening in our space.
It
I will
feels,
pause there.
I was going to say, Kate's comment, it makes me feel that there's a pressure, she says, to do even more detailed, comprehensive literature reviews. So there's very mixed emotions, isn't there, about the use of AI in higher education, as you just went through. And I think that's, of course, more diligence.
I'm just catching up with Kate's comment. Yeah, that's really useful feedback, Kate. Thank you. Yeah, I think there's lots to talk about in and amongst this. Unfortunately, today we don't have that space, but I guess what I would encourage you is to find people within your higher education institute and outside of it, and can start to create these discussions and groups to connect and to dig into some of these big questions, because I don't think anyone really knows where this will go, and some of the challenges that are coming up now will be different in a year's time. So I think having those working groups is a really big asset. And being at a university, you can look at those across different domains and sectors and roles. So I think, again, you're well placed to have a healthy and productive conversation on some of these challenges.
And we've got a question about what do you mean by semi-automation of research grants?
Okay, cool. So we will dig into this as an example later. For example, if I'm writing a grant application, I might write that from scratch every time. At some point, I'm sure I'll see the same patterns of questions starting to be asked. There might be elements of that that I can outsource to ChatGPT and train it on, let's say, the last 10 research grants that I've written. I want you to answer the next question based on that tone, vocabulary, this research. So I'm still interacting with a tool like ChatGPT. So it's not fully automated. I'm not saying, go and write this grant application. Here's the 10 questions. I think that's very risky. I'm doing it and I'm working alongside it. So that's what I mean when I say semi-automation, but really good question. Hopefully that makes sense. If it doesn't, I'll try to explain it again in a different way. But hopefully the example that I show later will give you a bit more insight into that from a practical point of view. Cool. I'll move the screen on. So we're going to go into our next exercise. So we are going to generate ideas for creating impact. So if you haven't already, open up chatgpt.com in your browser, and we will go and have a play in there next. So I'm going to use some of this text that I've used before. So I'm just going to slightly make my screen smaller so that I can copy and paste this text. So this is what we would call a prompt. So I'm just going to head to chatgpt.com. And you can do something similar. You don't have to use these words verbatim. So I'm asking ChatGPT, please can you summarize my research on, well, I'm just going to grab a research file.
It's a really good point from Amy in chat while you're doing that about, I know funding bid reviewers recognize language that's obviously been written in AI. So always review, edit, and ensure it sounds like it's written in your own words. We can see that on social media, that people aren't doing that. It's really, I think we've all got quite intuitively well trained into what ChatGPT sounds like. So yeah, I totally agree. I mean, V1 is never the one you're going to go with. And again, I would say it gives you the non-blank page. You've still got to put you into it. ChatGPT can't replicate you, and it's good to see that one of the institutes here, Anjali's institute, has a dedicated research team looking at AI and sustainability. So there's a nice link to that as well to show those conversations that you talked about are happening.
Brilliant. Yeah, that sounds grand. I'm just catching up with the chat. I don't see it.
That's all right. Well, I was basically doing
I've
that while
seen
you
it.
were while you were busy putting your prompt in. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I will check out that link. Thank you for that.
But I know the
Yeah,
V1
and I
when I put
agree.
something into chat sounds blooming awful, doesn't it, V1? It's never quite right.
Yeah, and I agree with Amy. I think I would hope to think that over the last 2 years, people would have moved on to the fact that whatever comes out of these tools needs a human touch. Sometimes that's more than others. I think what often gets touted around is you need to add that 20% at least. There are different ways to go about that, and we'll touch on that today. If you're using effective prompt engineering, that will reduce the amount of rewording. If you get into the more complex things like training a custom chat GPT on maybe the way that you speak or the way you write or the last 10 research papers you've written, you can start to give it that nuance so that it's not working from the out-of-the-box ChatGPT language. There are certain words that ChatGPT uses often out of the box that stand out. Hone is one of them, but there's a long list. You could even train your model not to use those tools. So there's always extra layers to this. It depends where you are in your own learning, and actually, if you even want to use these tools for that type of thing, there's actually no pressure either. Cool. So what we're going to do is I've just popped in some research that I've been fascinated with recently. It's open sourced, so I'm not doing anything that I shouldn't here. Just a caveat that if you have any research that you're working on or that is novel or that you wouldn't actually want in the public domain, I would recommend that you don't put it into something like ChatGPT yet. If you do, I would highly recommend that you have the paid version of ChatGPT and that you turn off one of the functions that allows ChatGPT to train itself on your data. I can share a video with Lucy after this for anyone that wants to do that. And I highly recommend doing that anyway. That just prevents OpenAI from learning on the data that you give it. So I'm asking it to summarize this research. I'll just put attach. Please can you summarize my research? This research, it's not mine. This research attached into a one-page executive summary, etc., etc. And then the second half, you can, if you prefer to read out loud, you can dictate to ChatGPT as well. I find that very handy, especially if I've got lots of ideas and I don't feel like distilling them myself. So I'm getting a one-page summary of some research conducted by Professor Dominic Wise at UCL that runs up the Helen Hamlin Center for Pedagogy. We're looking at building a digital product around reading together. So there's not a problem with using this research is in the public domain anyway. So it gives me a nice executive summary, gives me an overview of Professor Dominic Wise. It gives me some key contributions and findings. The double helix theory of teaching is pretty central to the work that his research institute and Dominic performs. I won't read all this verbatim, but you get the drill. I'm getting a quick summary of a research paper that I then might want to do a deeper dive into. But for today, we're also concentrating on the second element of this prompt. So I'm then going to ask ChatGPT to suggest specific and actionable ways to maximize the social, cultural, and economic impact of this research. So looking at things like policy influence, public engagement, knowledge exchange, industry partnerships, and social venture creation. So all things that I know that researchers and academics are pushed to do at higher education institutes to create that impact from your research, which I'm also really excited about the fact that this is more of a push in institutions, and that in particularly that element of social ventures is becoming something that a lot of academics want to explore. So I'm just going to copy and paste this prompt. I'm asking it to identify key groups and stakeholders that might benefit from this research, to look for collaborations and partnerships, look at cost recovery approaches. So how might I be able to generate revenue for my research so that I can do the next tranche of research, or I can go even deeper into this particular subject matter, because these things do need funding from something, whether or not it's a grant or revenue generation or both. I'm also asking it for recommended strategies for making the research accessible and engaging to non-academic audiences. And then lastly, I'm asking it for opportunities to inform and influence policy. So I am just going to go and copy and paste that. And let
A good question from
ChatGPT do
Lucy
its
about
thing.
putting all this into chat. But what we'll do, Lucy, is obviously I would probably recommend having a go at this after the event when you've got the recording, so you can put it all in and relate it to your specific piece of research that you put in that first prompt.
Yeah, I can send through these prompts on email or pop them in the chat if people want to do it real time. I can pop the one I've just sent. into the
Lots of
chat.
conversation about free and paid, and whether you should have a separate accounts if you're doing professional use and personal accounts, and kind of keeping those. What do you think?
I think it's a really good question. Each institution will have their own policy. I would check with that because that'll be the best. You'll be the most informed on the best way to use these tools if you check back with the specialist within your institution, and especially the policy. I'm just picking up the chat as well. Yeah, Lucy, I've just pasted in the prompt for you, but I'll send all this through post website. Alex, yeah, you're correct. SciSpace, what we're seeing as well is that ChatGPT is becoming a bit of a marketplace for other tools. And you can see this cross-pollination of tools, and SciSpace is actually within the ChatGPT universe, for lack of a better word, which is quite cool. I quite like using it on its own, but you can experiment and use it within ChatGPT. Other things like Canva, I think you may have had a workshop coming up where you explore the design tool at Canva. You can use that within ChatGPT now. Brill. So let's see what this outputs. So they've identified stakeholders, rightly so, early years educators and teaching assistants, nurseries, preschools, and primary school. I know that this research focuses on ages 0 to 11, so it's on the money there. Parents and carers, especially in under-resourced communities, local authorities. I won't read all of these. The one at the bottom is interesting for me because this is where I'm trying to collaborate, is around digital edtech, not necessarily a platform, but a product. So looking to embed that research and that evidence-based pedagogy into a practical learning tool to support parents in their reading journey with kids. I've asked it to look at strategic partnerships, and it's looked at the Education Endowment Foundation, Ofsted, Department for Education, and lots of other ones. Again, I won't read these out verbatim because of time constraints, but you get the gist. This is a part that I'm particularly interested in. So cost recovery, how might I be able to generate some sort of revenue from my research so that I can do more research or create some sort of social venture or social enterprise or not-for-profit. Train the trainer program.
This is the bit
That
I
one's,
love. Is like it really thinks outside of what your comfort zone potentially is like, and it really does brainstorm. And you're quite welcome to go, I don't like that idea, but you're also going to go, oh, I hadn't thought of that. And you could then ask it to give you some examples of a project like this that has done that. So again, you can kind of keep going with the narrative.
yeah, and I would encourage people to do that. Don't use these as isolated conversations. Build on that, because as you're doing that, you're creating that exchange, that conversational exchange. This particular chat's learning more about what we're trying to achieve or more about the research that we're interrogating. You're learning more about some of the ideas that it's pushing back. So keep
You
keep
can link this
moving.
into brand, which was the one we just did most recently with Sarah, as to, you've got all the potential stakeholders. Where should you start? Because there's a lot of people to talk to. So again, really focusing it in, who should we be talking to? Why them? What if we could prioritize them? You can do a lot of that in here for that. Like, who is that first person I need to get involved in this project for it to then get the momentum that I have as my goal, whatever that might mean.
Yeah, yeah. There's no reason why. I think you said about this inertia, or when we get stuck somewhere, that question that immediately comes to mind, where do I start? Just to get things moving, you can ask the chat that question and see what happens. You
Yeah.
don't have to do what it suggests, you don't have to like it, but it might just get that feeling um, of inspiration or the next step moving, especially when a lot of us are working remotely, or that we might be doing this on our own and we don't necessarily have someone to bounce an idea off or to bring in another perspective, especially immediately. This can be a useful tool.
And it will speed up a meeting, Because even if you disagree with it, that's great. But if you say, well, I've got a meeting to talk about the stakeholders and the focus from my marketing, or I want to do a video, or whatever, you can then go to a meeting, well, this is the work I've done, this is where I've got. So you immediately start talking about the how.
Yep.
Yeah.
I've seen some impressive use cases of where organizations are using this. And as you can imagine, bigger corporates with more resource and capital are using this in very interesting ways, especially around what you've just alluded to, Lucy. So doing some of the legwork pre-meeting so that meetings are actually used for decision making, not information exchange or knocking around certain topic matters. They're strictly for decisions. Seeing this used in sort of venture capital quite a lot.
Yeah.
Cool. And then we've got a little bit around making the research accessible, story-based animations, the double helix pedagogy that Professor Dominic Wise suggests in his research would be very useful if there was story-based animation. I wouldn't argue with that. You get the gist. We won't go through it. Policy is another interesting area because, for example, if this research is suggesting a more nuanced approach to learning how to read in early years, you could see how with the right pitch and the right storytelling and the right positioning that this could influence policy and actually change the way that children learn to read. And it's given us some tasters on how we might want to go about and do that. Cool. Did anyone manage to try that real time? And how was their experience? What do they think the strengths and the weaknesses are of using something like this?
Everyone's gone off to have a go.
And what I think what we'll find is if particular elements of these tools become useful, you might see tools starting to split out. So let's say, for example, in a university where there's a push to create impact from research, we might end up seeing a bespoke large language model created for that purpose. So rather than using ChatGPT, we might have something that's built on a more contextual and closed data set so that it gives academics more valuable outputs.
Yeah.
I think that's what we'll see if it's not already there.
I think it's just the confidence to go and have a play. I found my journey with using these tools gets better every time I use it.
Thanks, Laura. I've just seen your feedback. Brill. So yeah, encourage you to experiment and have some fun. Maybe the first time you do this, you don't use your research, you just use some research that you're interested in and that's freely available in the public domain before you then maybe go and speak to the expert and consult the policy within your own higher educational institution and how you might use this. Brill. So in the spirit of what Lucy said, we're continuing this thread and this conversation with one chat. I'm going to then go back to the same chat and ask ChatGPT, could it take one of those particular ideas and create a funding pitch based on the best practice approach to pitching for one of those three outputs? So for our particular example, I'm going to ask it to take the idea of, could you take the idea of creating a digital reading companion for parents based on this research and create a text output for a funding pitch to raise investment. I will copy that in the chat just in case people want to use something similar or adapt it based on your own use cases. And while you're having a play, I'll press the button and let ChatGPT do its thing. So it's giving me some context at the start. It's repeating back what I've asked it, and it's starting to formulate a pitch for me to take that research and create a digital reading companion. This won't be perfect. The more I think we're getting into more complex areas, if we're thinking about creating a funding pitch where eventually we're going to be in a room pitching for funding, you don't want to be leaving that to the entirety of ChatGPT. I would say this is probably likely going to be around 50 to 60% of the where I would need it to be. Interesting that it's pulled some research out that I've been reading a lot about lately. So by the age of 5, children from disadvantaged backgrounds are already 4 to 6 months behind their peers. So by the time a child gets into reception, they could be half a year behind their peers. And this exacerbates throughout the lifetime of that child as they go to secondary school, if they do go to further education, and then into their career. And it's formulated this pitch deck into, if some of you have done some of the pitch practice that Aspect offers, or within your university, you'll see these headings are probably the same, if not very similar, to the framework that they would suggest you formulate your pitch around. So it talks about, it's even come up with a name, Read Together. I'm not over the moon about that name, but it's good for a holding name.
But even you not liking it's good because it's giving you a name. You're like, well, that's not what I want it to do. You think, well, what do I want it to
Exactly.
do?
I think that's a good way to look at it as well. Even if something comes out and you don't like it, thinking about that critical thinking element again, which people at universities are really good at. That's why they're there. It's okay, why don't we like it? Let's critique that and come up with something better. Or if we don't like it, give me 10 more ideas. Or these are the words that I'm playing around with. And I'm thinking about parents reading together with their children, but I'm a little bit concerned because I don't want that to take away from physical books. Can you come up with some suggested names for me? It's exactly the same if I was bouncing ideas, let's say, off a creative director or someone that's got that creative specialism. Cool. So it's interestingly, it's come up with some suggestions that we're actually building into our solution. So daily bite-sized stories, interactive activities, age-tailored guidance, inclusive content, evidence-based nudges. So drawing on behavior economics, which is, we're actually doing this. So we will be leaning on behavioral economics when we build this product. It's then talking about the underpinnings of research and evidence to our solution. It's speaking about impact. I would want to go back and just check these numbers. Again, I'm not going to go through this verbatim, but you get the gist. Even come up with a value for seed investment. This would be the stuff that I wouldn't take directly from ChatGPT. I would want to go away and do cost modeling.
And you'd also look at the fund you're applying to. We're just doing this cold. Normally, if you're applying for a grant or a fund, you'd put their data into this as well and make sure that you aligned with their goals and what that fund was asking for. So we wouldn't normally just go cold on a pitch.
Yeah, agreed. And the more contextual data you can give ChatGPT or whatever the tool that you're using, the better the output will be. The same as if you hired someone or you had an apprentice or an intern, they showed up at your desk and you said, create me a funding pitch for a reading app, they'll do it. But if you spent 20 minutes with them, giving more information, grounding them in the research that you've produced, telling them some of the ideas that you're potentially looking at, the output that they come back with tomorrow is going to be a lot better than a one-line prompt or a one-line question. Cool. So feel free to drop any reflections, questions, what's good, what's bad, pop them in the chat whenever you want. And we are now going to move on to exercise 2. Is there anything on your mind, Lucy, that you want to touch on before we move into the next tool, which is Gamma?
I love Gamma, and that's your fault. That's
to get
something I learned on one of our first sessions. I think the key thing with chat is to experiment. I think if that what we want to do today is inspire you to use it sensibly. You know, don't put sensitive data in there, but go and have a play and see how it can enhance. Don't be afraid of it, and don't be concerned that you're compromising your credibility, because you're not if you use it in the right way.
Yeah, I agree. Cool. So we are going to move into Gamma. So I'm sure there's people in this room, this digital room, that like to create presentations using tools like PowerPoint. I'm not a massive fan of PowerPoint. I don't think it's that easy to use.
It
However,
feels
there
so
are,
clunky, doesn't it now? I remember when it was cutting edge.
yeah, it definitely, yeah, I agree. I'll be surprised if Microsoft don't end up buying Gamma, or one of the big tech companies buy it.
Well,
I'm sure
Prezi
that,
was one of the originals, wasn't it? Prezi was the first one that
yeah,
made presentations dynamic,
yeah.
but you still had to do all the work. But I won't take away your secret sauce. So tell us about Gamma.
I wish I wish it was my secret sauce. So the people that created Gamma, so they are evolving the way that we create presentations, but within their tool, you can also create websites and other types of documents. So we're going to pop into Gamma. This presentation that you're seeing today was created using Gamma. So gamma.app, you'll see a slightly different screen to mine because I pay for mine. But once you get there, you should see a screen like this. So I'll give everyone a minute or so to get to the Gamma homepage. Like a lot of these tools, they'll give you so much for free, and then you have to sign in with your email, and then they'll give you another tranche for free, and then you'll have to pay monthly. I do pay for Gamma as well as ChatGPT. I find that the value for money is incredible when I start to crunch some of the numbers.
It's
It
about
doesn't mean
it's
you
like
have to.
£8 a month or something, isn't it, Gamma? It's not a lot. 6 or 8? It's not, yeah.
Just drink less coffee.
ChatGPT is about £19 a
Yeah, I
month,
think so.
isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
once it's converted. But my assumption is a lot of universities will have the enterprise solution, so the
Mm.
organization level solution. So you would probably be able to get that
Well,
through
I
your
definitely think the
university.
return on investment for me with chat of the $20 is very easy in terms of the amount of time it saved me and how much it's moved me forward on projects. And with Gamma, I used it for a couple of projects where I was quite like this. You know, it's really good for you're putting slides together.
Yeah, I I would, yeah, encourage you to experiment and then make your own decision. But this is one of the best ones out there. Really interesting point in the chat around giving prompts and training AI requires time, but also wondering whether we replace our time for thinking about what matters with giving instructions to AI. I think these are all important reflections, and everyone is going to be somewhere different with these tools and the way that they use them and the way that they think about them. I think there's opportunities and risks in them no matter what way we use them, and I think that expands to any form of technology. I wouldn't be able to tell you how you should use these or why and when. Yes, this is a demonstration for you to go and play and to build up those boundaries and those lines yourself.
And see where it sits in your tools, your toolkit. This is
Yep,
literally it's a toolkit series. These are some tools which you can incorporate in your toolkit as you feel comfortable with.
yep. Yeah, for example, there's certain things. So if I, through the lens of a consumer, there's certain things that I'm happy to purchase these tools to use, but I wouldn't want to buy a book that was written by AI. I want a genuine author when I'm reading a novel or a book or listening to a piece of music or maybe viewing or purchasing art. For me, that's where my lines come in as a consumer. As a user, they're a little less boundaried, but depends on the task at hand.
Yeah.
Cool. So Gamma. So like I said, you can create a few different things. you'll get three options when you come to the first screen of generation. You can paste in text, you can generate you can generate a presentation from one line, or you can import a file. Where this might be useful, if you wanted to import a file, that might be a certain piece of research or a long document that you've previously written that you're looking to synthesize into a presentation format. That's where I've seen that function be handy. Generate from a one line might be when you are just looking for inspiration and you're starting something that's completely new or pretty novel for you, and you want Gamma to do a lot of the work for you. Caveat there is that you'll have a lot more work to do if you do a one-line prompt. And then thirdly, you could paste in some text. For example, I love this thing of tech stacking. So you'll hear people talk about what's your tech stack when they're building digital products. When you're using generative AI tools, I like to think about how could I use more than one tool together so that the sum of its parts are greater than the individual pieces. So for example, the last prompt that we did in ChatGPT, where I asked it to come up with a funding pitch, I may copy and paste that and paste it into this so that I can start to create the underpinnings of a pitch deck. So why don't we do that actually? So if I continue our thread and go back to our ChatGPT conversation, I'm just going to copy and paste the whole of the last output. I'm going to go back to Gamma and I'm going to generate by pasting in text. This is the first time you're using it. I would suggest you start with just a one-line prompt.
Do you know what I love doing in here is putting in a PowerPoint presentation. You know,
Right, I've not tried that.
I love that. So yeah, I did that to someone who did a pitch actually, pitch me, which is one thing that I manage, and it was the content of the pitch was great, but the actual deck was hideous. So I
Okay.
put their PowerPoint into Gamma and just wow, it was amazing, and you created images, all the stuff you're about to go through. But I didn't rewrite their deck. I just made the deck look the way it sounded.
Fascinating. Yeah, I've not heard it in that use case yet,
Yeah,
Lucy. That's
really
cool.
cool.
So just
So
purely from a design and aesthetics point of view.
yeah, and flow. It was a very dry. It was horrible. It made your eyes sad.
Okay.
So by just putting some great images in there, by giving it a better flow, by giving it a standardization of background and everything as well, it was one of those very basically someone who isn't comfortable in PowerPoint because it's boring, as you said.
Yeah.
But they'd done all the work in terms of the slide deck narrative because it was pitched just like this. But yeah, just running it through, creating some amazing images.
Mm.
It looked fabulous.
Yeah, it's a great use case. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Let's talk about that one.
You're gonna have a go now, aren't you?
So you can create different types of assets, like I said, presentation, web page, document, or social. I've never actually clicked social, so maybe someone could
No, I haven't done
experiment.
that.
But the main value proposition of Gamma is that it creates presentations that are visually pleasing and they help you in content creation. And there's a high level of customization once you're into the next stage. So I press continue. The next screen gives me a few variables to play with. I can ask it to generate content completely, so generate new content. I can ask it to condense the content that I've already given it, or I could say preserve the entirety of that content. So depending on what you're trying to create, so in the case of Lucy's example, they're using pre-existing presentation. My assumption is that you would want to preserve the content because there was nothing wrong with that content in that example. It was the design aesthetics that they wanted to improve. In our case, I'm just going to ask it to condense because there's quite a lot of words for slides. I'm going to ask it to stay medium. I'm going to change the language because we don't want to fall victim to what a lot of people fall victim to is when they use generative AI tools, their status quo is American spelling. So we're going to change that. What I like about Gamma is you've got a variety of ways that you can have your images generated. You can use AI generated images, which used to be, I think the first time I ran this, Lucy, we were all in agreement that they were often not fit for
They were
purpose,
hideous. Yeah.
sometimes quite scary, and we wouldn't recommend. But I'm just trying to think when that first workshop was, and the fact that we now have things like, if you haven't seen them, Sora, which is OpenAI's
So good.
image, which is unbelievable. So in the
Yeah.
space, I think that was probably less than 6 months ago, Lucy. In the
Yeah.
space of 6 months, we now have what I would say is a usable image generator on the market.
And
So
it is
stock,
it's really good. But as you say, you can have fun with this. So go on.
yeah, you don't have to take what it gives you. So we could go stock photos, web images, but just for today, we'll go AI images so we can have a bit of fun. We can suggest the image style. So let's just say photo realistic with human features. And you can choose, you won't see as many models as me, but you'll have the basic ones. I pay for mine, so I get the advanced. And it looks like they've got premium model now, which is new. So I quite like Imagen 3. We can change a bit more of the format. We can change the text if we really want to, but I'm just gonna, for ease of time, leave it how it is. They use the word cards interchangeably with slides. So we're asking for 8 slides. We can then pick a theme. As Lucy said, the aesthetics on Gamma are very clean, modern. You've quite a few different templates you can select from. If you have the paid version, you can create your own templates as well. So for my different types of work, I have different templates. For example, for my work at LSE, I have an Impact U template. For my consultancy, I have a template, and for my charity, I have a template, all saving me time and also making sure that my presentations that I create for them align with branding guidelines. For today, because it's sunny, let's go for something bright. That looks quite bright. Personally, probably wouldn't pick that, but we'll just go for that because of time. And we will press generate. And now Gamma's doing its thing. It's taking all that contextual information that I've given it, all the variables about the design, and it's starting to create the structure and the content of our presentation. Just want to reiterate what Lucy and I keep saying, quality in, quality out with a lot of these tools. The more information I can give it, the more contextual data I can give it, the better the output will be. And always with the caveat that I need to make sure that I add my, I would say with Gamma, 50 to 40% of my experience and knowledge and skill set to the asset that we create. So we've got the skeleton, and then within this, it's highly customizable. If I don't like these images, I can double click them. I can generate new images. I can change them to stock images. If I don't like what's coming out of the model, child looks very sad, looks like he's being made to do his homework on his own in the dark. It's not a great image.
But again, it already feels so quickly from here's the words to here's something we're editing. We haven't had to go and find those images. It feels like we're fine tuning much quicker.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And I think the one thing that excites me about starting to work more and more in higher educational institutes is that there's individuals or teams or institutes with decades worth of research, and they've spent a lot of time doing the hard work, the nuanced work. It's then, so they've got the data set, they've got the rigorous evidence-based data that often a lot of these big tools don't have, ChatGPT, etc. That if we can harness that, what's special about universities, and then use these tools to create the impact from these research, I think that puts universities in quite a strong position. That's my view, and it won't be everyone's view, and rightly so, but that's the way that I see it in terms of how can we create impact from research so that what motivates me is changing society and the environment for the better. I think we're in quite a good position for that. So that's quite a cool visual. I know the language is off, but I could probably have another interaction with that image and just say, please remove the text from this image. I quite like the visual of that sitting in a mobile phone, and the illustrations are quite, yeah, I quite like that.
There's an interesting question about aren't the images credited in the presentation? These are AI generated images, aren't they? So that's an interesting.
It's a great question.
Yeah.
It's a really good question. And I think there might be someone in the chat that has a better perspective than me. I don't think that's been, from a legal point of view, I don't think that's been solved yet. It's a really good thing to be cautious of, though, around
If you,
who
yeah,
owns the imagery.
if you have your own images, would you put them into Gamma?
Good question. If if they were an integral part of my business model, and I didn't have them trademarked or had any IP, I would be cautious, and I would go and check Gamma's data policy and the way that they use images.
But you could build it in Gamma, and then you can download it into PowerPoint and add your images there if you wish to, which means you're storing those images locally and they're not in the platform.
Yep.
So you can blend. If you have any worries about putting something into a tool, don't put it into the tool. You can export everything out. You can export ChatGPT into a Word doc. You can export Gamma into a PowerPoint. Export it to somewhere locally, so then you feel that you maintain control of those assets that you are sensitive.
It's a great question, though, something that I can go away and do a bit of digging on. I've not heard of this in court yet, but doesn't mean that it hasn't happened. I would be, yeah, I'd be interested to know, actually. I think that's a question that we should go back and ask Gamma, Lucy, see what they say. I can take
Yeah,
that one away.
yeah, yeah.
Cool. So we get a pretty good template to start from and to build upon. It's not perfect. There's no way that I would be taking that into a pitching environment without spending multiple hours, if not multiple days, making sure that that's got everything that it needs in it before I ask for any type of funding or investment. That gives me a starter based on a document that maybe I've created before, that where all the legwork's been done. So what I'm doing is I'm creating more value than something that I've already created. I think that's where these tools become even more powerful. I think when you're trying to use them just to create something in the moment, they're just using the internet and anyone can do that. But if you're using them to leverage something that you've already spent a lot of time, added a lot of value in, created value, these tools then create different assets for us to deliver value through that. That's where I get quite excited about these tools. Cool. So that's Gamma. Right, we've got 15 minutes left, so I will start to speed up. I'm just going to check the chat before we get moving. Yeah, that's a good point around. Could you also say in the prompt, please use only copyright-free images? You can definitely say that if you select stock images as your output in Gamma. So rather than using AI model to create images, you could use stock images, which are free images. I would also be really careful with that. Actually, there was a friend of mine that runs a charity. I don't know if you've ever heard of this one, Lucy, where they were using free stock images, and all of a sudden that stock image became, someone bought it, which is apparently there's a market for this. It's highly unethical with my perspective. So there's companies that buy the rights of stock images that are free to use, and then they use that to get themselves in a position to take people to court to say that you're using images that we now own.
Oh, good
So
grief.
yeah, I know. I've never heard of it before. So that was quite a small charity up in Norwich.
Wow.
What you'll
Yeah.
find is if you're at a university, your university probably pays for a stock image website subscription. I would use that one because that will be a lot safer. Yeah, really bizarre. I'm sure it's a bit of an outlier case, but
And
apparently there are
capture your own
organizations that do
imagery.
that.
I think as soon as you can, if you have a visual project, capture your own imagery as much as you can, because then you have some control over it.
Yeah,
It's also more authentic. You can tell, you know, you can say AI generated. People know when it's not real, but we'll forgive it on
I
things like
agree.
presentations. But on the website, you want your own imagery.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, massively agree with that. I think it's good if you're starting up and you just want to get a website or a landing page up or a presentation done. But if you're starting a business or a social venture, as you evolve, getting real imagery will always be of higher value, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Cool. Let's go to the next level. So we're going to touch on prompt engineering. So this is just a way that we ask different generative AI tools, whether it's SciSpace, ChatGPT, or Gamma, how we ask it to do things. So we can be really generic in the way that we ask questions or we prompt these tools. Those words are interchangeable, and many users still treat generative AI as a search engine. That's not a judgment. We're so used to using things like Google that when we move into another space that looks and feels a bit like Google, we're going to use it in a similar way. However, this leads to suboptimal results. As I keep saying, AI works best with context-rich, task-specific inputs. So a generic prompt or a generic question might be summarize climate change research. A better way of framing that question could be summarize the key findings of research on the economic impacts of climate change on low-income countries. So we're already evolving the way that we use this tool. However, we can go a step further and we can use prompt engineering to make sure that we get even more valuable outputs. There's lots of different frameworks out there when it comes to prompt engineering. Prep is one that I use because it's easy to remember and it's actually easy to action. So prep stands for purpose, role, expectations, and parameters, where purpose is why are you using it? Are you writing a research grant proposal? Are you doing a meta-analysis of research? This just gives the AI a more nuanced approach to what you're asking it. Again, exactly the same as if you had a junior colleague or an apprentice or an intern. If they turn up in your office on day one and you don't really tell them why they're there, it's very hard for them to deliver what you want them to. Same with the role. If you've got a new member of staff, what's their role? We should be treating an interaction with a generative AI tool, especially like ChatGPT, like that. So what we're looking for, project manager, an entrepreneur, a marketeer, a bid writer, a researcher. This helps the AI give relevant responses. And then we also have to give it guidelines on our expectations. Again, works in real life. If you ask me to deliver something, if you don't tell me your expectations when I deliver it, I might be miles away from them. So let's tell the tool how long it should be, could be word count, page count, what type of tone, language, structure. We can also tell AI what not to do. Don't use certain words like this, or I don't want you to include this type of research or data. And this is all about clarifying expectation. And then lastly, the final P is parameters. So these are the rules that we're setting. So they might be specific data points, key messages and constraints. This helps AI to understand the scope. Let's say that I'm trying to do a meta-analysis on what does the word social enterprise mean? but actually I only want to understand that through the lens of Latin America, I might ask it to exclude all other geographic regions. So we're building boundaries and parameters. I'll say it again. If you imagine that you're delegating this package of work to an intern, an apprentice, or a new junior colleague, that's a good frame of mind to get into when you're using these tools. At the moment, that may change in 6 months, a year's time. So this is an example of a grant that I've written before for the charity that I run using the PrEP framework. So I've given this was using ChatGPT. I've given this particular chat a role. It's a grant writer with experience in mental health and community engagement projects. I've asked it to write a 250-word formal and persuasive response to a grant application for £20,000 from the National Lottery Awards for All. I would probably hyperlink the National Lottery Awards for All webpage. If I had a guideline document, I would also attach that to the chat, giving it more context. I've asked it the question that I want it to answer. How does your project involve the community? I've given it some more contextual information about the charity. And then I've given it some parameters around what I would like it to emphasize, what type of impact I want it to include in its answer. So why does this work? I've touched on it, but I'll say it again. I've told ChatGPT its purpose, its role, my expectations, and the parameters that I'm expecting it to operate within. What I would recommend, and if this is something that you feel like it could add value to your ways of working, is to try this, but try it first in quite a low risk, low expectation scenario. So maybe it's a research grant or a bid that you're highly unlikely to get, and that is actually of low value, so that you can get comfortable in a low risk stake environment using some of these tools. You may even want to do it on a grant that you've already applied for, so that you can compare the output to the one that you submitted and do a bit of an A/B test. We're not going to do that live in today's application, sorry, in today's workshop, because we don't have the time. But this bid writing is probably the workshop and the training that I get the most requests for, because it can be quite codified. You've often got a certain way that you would write a bid, and every time you write these, there's a slight nuance depending on the funder or the type of research, or if it's in the case of a social enterprise or a social venture, the impact theme. But the core is always quite similar, so it leaves itself open to replicability or being able to be codified.
We've also done an amazing workshop on finding grants to apply for using ChatGPT. Again, we're not doing that today, but I was amazed when we did that, how many amazing grants came up that I'd never heard of.
Yeah.
So, but we can share the link to that webinar because that was for a different project. But again, it's so applicable of just fishing out there to see who might fund the next stage of your project. The normal suspects came up and a whole pile of people that you hadn't heard of either. And we were both going, wow, who's this? Not huge pots, but 5 figures, that moves things forward, doesn't it? So
Yep. Yeah, I've used these practically in my own role and been able to find grants that are a little bit more esoteric. So then it means that they're less competitive.
yep.
And we've been able to secure funding to further our impact. So we've got 5 minutes left. If there are any big questions, reflections on strengths, weaknesses of using some of these tools, please pop them in, and I will try and get as much done before we wrap up. I'll send these slides through to Lucy. Look, there's thousands of other tools out there. There are some tools on the market now that are being used quite extensively to help academics plan their research, to aid the writing of that research. There's been a lot in the press around people being caught using these tools. There's a right and a wrong way to use a lot of these tools. I think the key point would be to use this alongside your work, not in replacement.
It's
that
common
prevent.
sense, isn't it? This is the whole point. This is a complementary common sense tool. But
I,
yeah,
I,
I'll
I
let your
yeah,
smile
I would agree. I
there.
would agree with you, Lucy. I think, but just in case, always be mindful of the way that we use these, and it's human first with this technology helping us to do things better, not the other way around. There'll be other people that think differently, and you're very welcome to think differently. But for me, we start with the human, and we use these tools to make our life easier and to create the impact that we want to see.
Absolutely. And I know there's also a big narrative which we're not going through today is how students are using this, and it's not making people smarter. If it's not used in the right way, there's a whole, yeah, we don't have time to talk about that in this particular workshop, but there's a lot of conversations around this technology. But the purpose of today is to just to use it from a curious, creative, constructive way.
Yeah, I'm just looking at some of the questions as well.
Scroll down a bit because people can't read the bottom three.
Integrated. Oh, sorry.
There we go.
I'll send through a few more that are applicable to research and academics as well, around supporting you maybe form your next research question, or the meta-analysis bit, or the writing bit, that are actually credible tools as well. There's a lot of in the market that aren't. There are a lot that are as well. So I'll make sure that you get a list that's been vetted as well. I'll send
I've been
them.
using things, you've got Otter down there. I've been using Fireflies.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Again, a very similar transcription tool because if you put Fireflies or Granola or Otter in a meeting, it means you're just capturing all the information. Yes, ethically, you have to tell everybody that it's on. You have to tell everybody that what they're saying is being recorded. You have to make sure so you would follow that through. But it's so amazing to then create assets after it.
Yeah.
I mean, again, you use your common sense. If you're using an AI to record a meeting and someone gets quoted, you'd run the article past them before you published it, which you would have done anyway.
Yeah, I'm with you
But
on that, Lucy. I
common
think
sense. We're big fans of common sense, aren't we?
I'm with you on that. And then just to wrap up in the last minute, just to avoid some common pitfalls, it's not a search engine. Inputs need engineering, and outputs need critique and
Yeah.
human addition. Those are sort of my three main pillars when approaching these tools. And Lucy's said that multiple times as well. And that brings us, yeah, we've just got there in time, which is great.
Look at that, boom, on the clock. Like you've done this before. Even with all our tangents.
Yeah, and this is me. This isn't an AI version of me, by the way. That
That's what
is,
that's what the AI version of you would say.
yeah,
Mm.
true. They are on the market, but I'm yet to be convinced.
No, not yet. Not for this sort of interaction as well. Thank you all very much. Go and enjoy the sunshine.
Thanks, everyone.